Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight we're going to be discussing strategy and taking a look at the revolutionary spirit and the way that it has always been used by the state. In fact, I'll give you an example before we start, because a lot of revolutionary movements and even completely bogus fake protest movements, such as, say, Extinction Rebellion, are all part of the Global Action Plan. One of the main aims of Extinction Rebellion, according to their internal documentation, was to build structure, community, and test prototypes in preparation for the coming structural collapse of the regimes of Western democracies, now seen as inevitable due to stored-up crisis, thus preparing a foundation to transform society and resist fascism and other extremes. That's the opposition, by the way. This includes creating, rising from the wreckage, a citizens' assembly based on sortition. Citizens' assemblies are the absolute control of the narrative and steering the public into an intended outcome in the most childish and simplistic way, which means that we have a bit of a problem. In that, in the UK, we are far too unsophisticated and not knowledgeable enough about how systems actually work. Now, there's a lot of evidence that can be used against the current Global Action Plan, including, of course, the rollout of the COVID Action Plan. For instance, two key memorandums from the World Health Organization have just been discovered by a journalist called Patrick Jordan, and it proves that the World Health Organization has intentionally created the 3-shot killer vaccine that people in the USA and other countries could soon be forced to take. It actually details in this memorandum that these 3 stages of the breaking down of the immune system are in fact part of their action plan and linked to their affiliated labs such as the Centers for Disease Control and, of course, Johns Hopkins University and Imperial College and everyone who's rolling it out. So we're looking at something pretty well organised here. Now, I'm not going to get into that in a show maybe on Republic Broadcasting Network on Tuesday, but tonight's show is all about strategy. So, as an example for starters about the whole history and past, future, and of course the present of the Global Action Plan. Trade Integrated Solutions, a document on a webpage of World Integrated Trade Solutions, shows that the UK imported over 22 million COVID-19 PCR test kits in 2017. Now, the reason I'm bringing this sort of thing up is that the framework that's in place can easily be taken apart by people if they want to do it. And that goes into the COVID-19 Act too. And that really does take us into what I was going to talk about. Also, we've got to remember is the World Bank gave out the money to those countries who were enforcing a lockdown. Belarus did not accept any money from the World Bank and therefore did not lock down. So, bearing all this in mind, going up against the locked gates of global governance deception will only result in exhaustion, defeat and death. For throwing insults and trifles at demons will bring the full force of their wrath. They will twist your words with theirs on every platform they own, and they do own pretty much every platform. They will make the world turn against you as their lies are relentless and their legions are many. Better to be strategic and have silver bullets in your armoury than let the demon actually have it when they are not expecting it. It's called strategy. Do not let the demon win by their own deception. Make them stumble over their own obstacles and fall in their tracks. Why fall into confrontational traps of your own making? And what we're talking about here is controlled and organised protest movements. But using strategy and surprise has actually saved my own life. And there's probably a lot of other people out there who can say the same thing. And it has done for all those who use reason, insight, and clear perception. Now, the ignorant and willing, along with the willfully ignorant, are an army which will defeat you without a thought-out and insightful plan. So, people who've not got a plan or do not understand the system of governance that they're in will always fail. And that failure and that protest and that reaction is written into the overall plan. Now, I'm just going to read something from a document called Our Common Future in 1987. This was part of the Brundtland report. Gro Harlem Brundtland was the Prime Minister of Norway. She, in partnership with Maurice Strong, Edmund Rothschild, Stephen Rockefeller and others, were all there at the 92 Rio conference. What's that got to do with COVID-19 and protests? Well, in actual fact, the template that we're seeing now is the template that was used then. And that template I've been talking about for nearly 15 years. And the interesting thing about that is that the public are not that interested in things that directly affect them. They like knee-jerk reactions. In other words, let's go on a protest. Here's your banner. Let's go up and have an unfocused, pointless day out. They love that. And so does the state. But this is from Our Common Future, this document in 1987, really about this new system of communitarian global governance which we are in. Quote, how are individuals in the real world to be persuaded or made to act in the common interest? The answer lies partly in education, meaning of course indoctrination, institutional development and law enforcement. Most important, effective participation in decision-making processes by local communities can help them articulate and effectively enforce the common interest. That's what this was all about, the big society, the new big society of citizen spies where everyone enforces the new system on each other. This is from Our Global Neighbourhood, a document which came as part of the report of the Commission on Global Governance 1996. Quote, there is no alternative to working together and using collective power to create a better world. At the global level, governance has been viewed primarily as intergovernmental relationships, but it must now be understood as also involving non-governmental organisations. Wait for it, here we go. Citizens' movements, multinational corporations and the global capital market. Therefore, these are your organised protests, coming not only from the intelligence services, but also from the likes of George Soros and the NGOs talked about here. It carries on, interacting with these global mass media of dramatically enlarged influence. There must be an agreed global framework for actions and policies to be carried out at appropriate levels. A multifaceted strategy for global governance is required. Therefore, any strategy which is going to usurp any of this has to be a multifaceted strategy. Knee-jerk reactions are built into the system. So, this one is from the World Government Summit 2019. It is not possible to reach our goals without the participation of all groups of people. In other words, that's the big communitarian we. We must plan and invest for something which is beyond the political cycle. Long-term strategies up to 2030 with a priority national investment plan. This will be the main tool to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, a quote from Richard Razi, Deputy Prime Minister for Investment and Information. This is from the 2019 Global Governance Conference. Yes, he's the Prime Minister for Investment and Information in Slovakia. He says, It is not possible to implement Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals without the participation of all. The SDGs are at the heart of all policy, national and local. They are foreign policies and at the core of strategic political framework. There must be partnerships among various stakeholders in every country. The state, academia, private sector and NGOs, and through regional and municipal administration, all stakeholders should play a role in the SDGs. Let's have another quote now, which is from quite a few years ago, from a government think tank called Demos. We have interacted with Demos over the years, and Demos are basically an arm of British intelligence. How do I know this? Well, they told us so. Here's a quote from Demos, and this is for all the people who believe that the revolutionary spirit has not been accounted for. Okay, the new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizens groups taking direct action. Here's a quote now from Gail Bradbrook, the founder of the puppet show known as Extinction Rebellion. In social change theory, people react to emotions, not logic and fact. And that is what we're seeing up and down the country at the moment with these little outbreaks of pretty much manufactured dissent. I could go on and given the chance, I will. So if you're interested in the bigger picture of what I'm talking about here, get in touch through the website because I'm interested in talking to groups of people who have actually got an idea of what I'm talking about and have some strategy. In other words, new communities must be created outside the communitarian narrative. Now, before COVID, I was speaking to groups all over the country. The present outcomes of Agenda 2030, I was talking all about that, and of course the Global Action Plan and what is coming, and COVID-19 is merely an accelerator of what I was talking about. The UK public do not want to engage directly with what affects them unless it affects them directly. Therefore, they will be distracted onto issues of no importance, which is exactly what the Global Action Plan requires. They are like all victims and puppets. They think small and the globalists think big. This means that in a new communitarian system, the outliers have to be incorporated. Therefore, resistance is part of the overall plan. The revolutionary principle is used by every failed protest group on the planet. So your resistance is actually part of the plan. Your struggle is essential in making the new system look like there are dissenting voices, that there are outliers, and they're going to say the silent majority want it though. I've been up against this for a long time and seen exactly how it works, from Occupy to your local council to every movement, so-called revolutionary movement, that has actually existed in the past 20 years. And I've also been reading about the ones which existed in the last 200 years. And it's always the same thing that happens. And that's what this show tonight is really about. So dissenting voices are used as an example, basically, of dissenting voices. They, of course, will never actually be heard. There's a thesis, an antithesis, and then a synthesis. Everything gets synthesized into what is already planned. Unless you have strategy, you will never see what's coming. Because if you react against what's happening in the present, you are being steered into your own future by the social engineers. It's basic social engineering. So give the public two lies. It doesn't matter what they are. For and against, it doesn't matter. These two polar opposites create the third way, the synthesis. And this has been the philosophy of all social engineers, all radical Freemasonic movements, and I've been looking at it for a long time. There's loads of stuff on the site about it. So the two opposites are necessary. Further distractions give the illusion of diverse voices. They are all working towards the same end as they are being steered by change agents and, of course, the revolutionaries themselves. They are given their side. As the new revolutionaries are saying, choose your side. We've heard a lot of that the past couple of weeks, haven't we? Choose your side. Well, that is part of the plan. This has nothing to do with what is actually being played out. The revolutionary is so caught up in his indignation and convinced of his worthiness and his righteousness that he does not see the end game. His future he sees only as the struggle of the present, and is filled with righteousness and injustice, which keeps him going until the realization that he himself or her has been steered into the inevitable outcome. This driver of emotional reaction keeps the revolutionary blind to strategy and the intended outcome, which is hurtling ever faster towards him or her. George Soros understands this fully and uses the passionate but foolish revolutionary and also the huge majority of the fake virtue signallers posing as revolutionaries for steering purposes for an already planned outcome. That is the genius, the simplistic genius of this steering mentality. In other words, you know the psychology of the people who you aim to steer. And people like Soros, Gates, it doesn't matter. Talk about any of them. Talk about any globalist. Go back 30 or 40 years, go back 100 years. They all know this. They all know this stuff. This does not, of course, mean it will work. Of course it doesn't. A lot of this stuff that is manufactured does not work. But even this simple strategy is way beyond the thinking of the knee-jerk emotional response of the proletariat. They are unaware of the planned outcome which was already in place. There will, of course, be no revolution, just some sloganeering and misleaders who will soon be forgotten about. Take a look around you and look at who's putting themselves up there. Look at the egotists, chancers, narcissists, and basically misleaders who are trying to steer things at the moment. I'm not saying they're doing it intentionally, but they are part of the system that's already in place. And this then is the current state of the UK. Over many years, our channel studied and exposed the need for strategy and also the consistent lack of it, because the public are steered in extraordinarily simplistic ways, because the public are extraordinarily simplistic and trusting in their outlook on life. They have no strategy. Only people who have lived under totalitarian dictatorships understand this. The British do not understand this because they believe they were brought into something which was once a democracy. But yes, we also look at the steering of willing participants into movements and counter movements, all facilitated by or created for the purpose of controlling the narrative of public opinion. The latest, most obvious and absurd example is, of course, citizens' assemblies. The acceptance of this surely means there is no hope for the UK. If the UK accepted citizens' assemblies to be steered into intended outcomes by change agents and manipulators, and we've covered this on so many shows, and it's so obviously completely fake, then that means that for the majority in this country, there is no hope because they have given up all of their mindset to this governance concept. The question is, though, why does the UK fail to see this, and why are solutions not being talked about? The answer lies in the entitled assumptions of its mainly uninformed citizens. Those who have lived under communism tyranny can see it a mile off. They can really see it a mile off. And I've had these conversations a lot over the past couple of years, because for depth and strategy, East Europeans and Russians know a hell of a lot more than anyone in the UK. So if anybody should be leading protests, it's people from former communist countries, not communists who want to turn Britain into a communist country. Something to think about there, I think. Yeah. The basic misunderstanding of this is the reason why there's no real understanding of what's going on and being played out in real time at the moment. So let's look at this COVID action plan and resistance to it. The main focus was at first on a solution, and that solution has now been dissipated. The main solution to what is going on in the UK is the COVID Act, which was underpinned with the updated 1984 Act, which incorporated detention and forced vaccination from around 1975. We talked about this at the very beginning of the lockdown. The correct act for the COVID legislation of this year is actually the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004. And that act is reviewed every 28 days and can only be renewed if there is an ongoing crisis. Now, I'm doing this from memory, and I'm pretty sure that's the case. But it has to be reviewed about once a month. So, in other words, it can only be used in times of crisis, as even the media are now saying that there's no crisis. Well, this act would now have to be removed. And this is the point that's being missed by pretty much everybody. They're talking about masks, vaccinations, child abuse, and whatever else they want to talk about. Oh, immigration, whatever they want to talk about. It's all being steered, and they're being steered into issues which are unfocused, unnecessary, and have nothing to do with the COVID action plan. Now, any protest which does not identify exactly the solution and what is actually wanted is of no use whatsoever. And really, with this COVID-19, this is the only matter which needs to be focused on, which is this act. The COVID Act should have been in line with the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004. Now, many barristers were talking about this. So in other words, the solution is in the law. It's not in going out and listening to narcissists talking rubbish and getting you arrested. It's a waste of time. The solution is already there, but it takes intelligence to actually put this across. And we're going to get into that as the show goes on. All the focus on masks, vaccinations, lockdowns is currently identified by the misuse of this act in the present circumstances. So the sort of solution to everything that's being talked about and everything that's being railed against is already there. It's in the law. And if this 1984 Act is being used incorrectly, which it is, because even the media is saying that this is not a pandemic, then in that case it has to be removed. And the Civil Contingencies Act was the only act which should run alongside it. And this is according to our so-called learned elders. Yes, I don't trust them either, but the system is in place. And within that system, there is the remedy. And that seems to have been forgotten by the knee-jerk reactionaries and fake revolutionaries spouting things and shouting through microphones all over the country. Therefore, in other words, resisting the cause of the problem is of no use whatsoever and only enables the state to undermine the so-called protesters, which they themselves have enabled. I think I've made that point enough now, so we'll move on. But there's no strategy or thought going on. Those schooled in fake revolution and its ineffectiveness can see straight through this and onto the solution. The UK citizen, though, has no experience of strategy and therefore no solution. Now, I'm not generalising here and saying everybody. I'm saying the majority of people who are reacting in a knee-jerk way to this because they don't realise that what they're doing is already factored in to the ongoing plan. And that has been revealed in many documents that we've covered. What is needed is a strong legal case to be made to the public by articulate and credible speakers, not inarticulate, banner-waving chancers who are doing the job of the new system by creating the waves which enable it to be discredited and fully taken over. And that's the next phase. The next phase is discrediting and infiltration, as Demos clearly stated years ago. The state has already told you what they're going to do, so why go along with it? No point. Just as in the manufactured fake dissent of the state, the belief in change is a belief in that which will never happen. There will be no remedy in going back into the old system, which was in itself an illusion, which a majority believed in until recently, and many still do. This old illusion is gone and has now become the new global health system. It's already in place. The system that people are railing against is already in place. So strategy is the only key. And new alliances and basically unpredictable alliances. Unpredictability is not factored in. And these people are not imaginative. They're methodical up to a point, but they are not imaginative. They cannot react to sudden disruption and change. They cannot react to it. They can only react to predicted outcomes, such as riots, protest, little uprisings. Those are all factored in. When you're doing that, you're just enabling it. So, really, this is where strategy has to be the key thing. And this is what I find most interesting about it all, because having studied this and the documents and the social engineering behind it, we are in a virtual reality game. No, I'm not getting all new agey. I'm saying that basically it's being run as a computer program. So yeah, the original aim has been lost, basically, in a sea of diffused and unfocused generalities. And that's what I've seen over the past week. And we're only just starting this. So, in other words, they had this big meet-up in Trafalgar Square. And since then, it has become fragmented. It's forgotten its original cause. And it's already ripe for infiltration, ridicule, and destruction. So, let's do something different. The globalist ideal is that there are disparate protest groups which give an impression of resistance. These are their own worst enemy and can be shamed and destroyed by the state and its control of the media. Now, when we reported on the Irish storming their state broadcasting propaganda station RTE last week, we could safely describe this as the beginning of a coup. Now, that is something different, because they were calling out directly what was coming out of the media, and they were demanding that that building be taken over by the people. Now, that is exactly what happens with a globalist coup. So, in other words, that was the people doing something that the globalists have done for years. All right, they didn't succeed in storming the building, but the concept is extremely important. And I talked to a friend in Ireland last night. It was very encouraging. Kieran Boyle, Alternative News. And I'll be going on there on Wednesday with Kieran. And he was talking about what's happening there. And there is much more strategy going on. And it was so refreshing to talk to somebody who got what I was talking about and told me that they were already implementing what I was suggesting previously on the back of their own initiative. So that was very refreshing. But the way to replace a government is to take over its media. This is the very first thing that happens when a government is overthrown. The fact that the building, the RTE building, was not stormed and a new government imposed is not really the point. What we're doing here is getting nearer to the actual reality of the C word. What's the C word? Yes, you got it. Change. Attacking the main area of control is fundamental to success, and this was a step in the right direction. Identify the real enemy. Propaganda. The use of propaganda to implement truth is something the public are in general very naive of. So you fight propaganda with propaganda, but that which is based on undeniable fact. So in the UK, we once again have a group, like previous groups, who are inarticulate and pushing revolution with no idea of what they're actually doing, as there is no strategy. So why does the World Economic Forum call their rollout of the new system strategic intelligence? Get their newsletter. It's called Strategic Intelligence. Why is it called Strategic Intelligence? Well, for a very good reason. Because they are drawing together all strands into the narrative. They are imposing this on every government in the world through the World Bank. And they are drawing together all of these disparate outlying groups into one agenda. So the protest is part of the agenda. The UK is already structurally in place within the new system. So there is no point in going out and railing against a system that is already in place and is already functioning. So the inability to identify the issue is what strategic intelligence wants. The unfocused energy harvesting going on will drain the participants who do not yet know that they're part of the plan. They find out afterwards. They find out later that they were part of what they were trying to overthrow. Their actions were factored in from the start. So let's have a look now at this communist-looking logo, this stand-up X with its crossed fist symbol. Now, this looks like something George Soros would reject as being a parody of even the globalist activism that he funds. It makes Extinction Rebellion look sophisticated. Some will say, so what, at least they're doing something. Well, those that say that are the people who have no strategy. And that is the important point, because I'm actually being contacted now by people who have got strategy, and that's what this show's about. It's not for those people who want to go protesting and get on are given their protests. Those people who go to things like the Citizens' Assembly, which was arranged by the security services to give people a banner, bust them in, bust them out, and make sure nothing happened. What's the point of that? Want to create something which will survive in this system that they're rolling out, which is already pretty much in place. So if it's in place, you have to usurp it. You can't go and rail against it. It's too big. So what do? You have to understand it. And to understand this, you have to study it. And that's where I find it fascinating. That's why I really like talking to people from Eastern Europe and Russia, because they understand strategy. It's of utmost importance. I learned so much from people like General Konstantin Petrov and even Yuri Bezmenov. But there are many, many more. There are many ex-military commentators and even people like Alexander Nekrasov, who died actually this year. I saw him talking, and he was at this event with George Galloway, who was pontificating and talking rubbish as usual, but taking a very long time to say nothing, as he usually does. And Alexander Nekrasov got up and nailed the Skripal incident within 5 minutes. And he just laid out exactly what would happen on the ground and why it was presented to the public the way it was presented. End of story. Nothing else. It's a shame that we don't have people like that involved in actually doing something. Well, if we did, the state would be raiding them, I suppose, so they have to stay in the background. And this is another thing. You never put your talent on show. When you're doing this stuff, you have to form a group, and that group has to become unaffiliated, because they are going to tie everything to... I've had this before, and in actual fact, I don't really understand why, but the stuff that I've been putting out has been relentlessly attacked over many years, which I found quite incredible at first, but we were getting solutions. That was the thing. We were going into court and getting solutions within their system. They don't like that. We were usurping their own system. I mean, things like the bringing down of the Crime Stoppers website, you will never see that in mainstream media. You see, that's the thing. If you're in this for the right reasons, you're not a glory seeker. You are there to actually get results. And results are all that matter. Okay, yeah. Some will say, at least they're doing something. Yes, they are. They're harvesting the energy of the participants and doing exactly what the new system wants them to do. Dissipate energy and enable a faster rollout of all aspects of the new system. This will also be used to gain public support. So the promoted and self-promoted narcissists and chancers who push their agendas and lead these groups undermine themselves and all those who are involved with them by association. If they are not articulate, they have no credibility in the eyes of the media-led population. The media are inarticulate, but they have the biggest microphone, which is the media. Now, this is something which could be easily remedied, but the articulate voices are drowned out by the self-serving, uninformed and clueless orators who shout into microphones like amateurs and wannabes. This is not reality TV, what we're going through. It's serious, and intellect is really needed. Appeal to emotion and lack of fact is what the post-truth world is all about. As we were saying at the beginning, quote from Gail Bradbrook, people react to emotion. They don't react to fact anymore. They react to emotion and belief. So everything has to be presented with a religious fervour, even if it is completely vacuous, which most of these so-called protests obviously are. So, yeah, just read the UK Guardian any day of the week to see logical fallacies, false arguments, baseless opinions and ad hominems. The globalists need resistance so they can undermine the opposition, and the unfocused sloganeers are giving the new system exactly what it needs. Every mindless slogan like choose your side is implementing the new system, as is every reactionary soundbite and unfocused and in effect mindless gathering that they throw their energy at. Those who claim to be the voices of the movement are intellectually way too easy to discredit, and we've seen that over the past week. You see, the point is that if you are not completely articulate and you have not got 3 or 4 absolute dynamite facts, and you are not able to turn the opposition questions back into questions on them and absolutely disgrace them, even when you're being shouted over, then you are worse than useless. You yourself are an enabler of global governance. So those who claim to be the voices of the movement are definitely intellectually way too easy to discredit. It is cliched grandstanding, and the solution is never ever mentioned. They're used by the media because of their incompetence and inability to use constructive and effective argument. We've seen this recently when a few good counterpunches would floor the dumb media clones, but we're dealing with dumb in the media and unfortunately even dumber in the protest pen. The protests, or so-called protests, which are enabling the global governance system have been rapidly defocused to cover a wide variety of participating groups. This is the communitarian thing, something for everybody. A multipolar front which achieves nothing. That's the whole point. The more you dissipate into little counter movements and different issues, the more dissipated it becomes and the more ineffectual it becomes very, very quickly. So yes, groups are being distracted into multiple vague causes which do not identify the solution. This already reminds me of gatekeepers in the past, like this, I'm going to mention this treacherous and compromised gatekeeper, Bill Maloney, who was eventually caught out. Now, this horrendous gatekeeper was being worshipped by people for doing absolutely nothing. And he was caught red-handed manipulating a vulnerable witness and someone who'd been abused and perverting public justice for the sake of the intelligence services. Therefore, he had to disappear. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, there was an abuse victim who was bullied by him into saying that somebody who wasn't an abuser was an abuser in order to discredit a witness. That's criminal. That's perverting the course of public justice. That is what the intelligence services do all day long, however. But the puppeteers of the Occupy movement are still steering idiots for the likes of Extinction Rebellion and other Soros groups. Their rhetoric and sound bites are the same as those being thrown around by the new version, which will be used in the same way as Occupy was being used to bring in a new agenda. So have a look at our films. I mean, I was doing this 10 years ago. It's really interesting. The Puppet Masters of Occupy. Have a look at that. That's how this Soros fake movement strategy was being used back then. Also, we did one called Inside Occupy and the Bank of Ideas. So the knee-jerk protest agenda is already diffused onto various subjects, therefore dissipating all energy into the intended result. Nothing. Creating different agendas, none of which can be realistically focused upon for an intended outcome. This is exactly what's happening now. Add to this the split caused by these toxic narcissists who have taken over. And the public are already having doubts, which will only aid the undermining and inevitable infiltration and takeover. So the COVID-19 legislation should, in my opinion, be the first and foremost issue but is now not even mentioned. The original group and aim is therefore undermined because that's what it started out as. This was at one point the main focus. It's been defocused now into issues which will not succeed. The media and the reactionaries have used the issue of wearing masks as a conflict point. This is a non-issue in that it cannot be mandatory when any member of the public can exempt themselves. The police, public and private venues will not enforce mask wearing. And the police will only attend if there's a breach of the peace. Now, if you've got a business and you want people to wear smiley badges and someone doesn't wear a smiley badge, then you're quite within your rights to not let them in. That's why people can get barred from pubs. It's the same thing. It's up to the venue. And the only way that you are going to get in trouble is if the venue wants you to leave and you don't leave, and that's called a breach of the peace. Now, British Transport Police were recently filmed assaulting a man on a train. Now, this is an interesting one because British Transport Police are not the police. They're a private company funded by railway companies. Therefore, they work for private interests while on railway property. And when not on railway property, they need permission from the local police force. It's called a mutual aid scheme. See our show from a few years ago called Bogus Police Raid Exposed. I think it's called Bogus BTP, British Transport Police Raid Exposed. And that shows you that they are a private company. They are a corporate body. They are not Crown affiliated. Well, they're not Crown affiliated as the police are meant to be. They are Crown City of London affiliated, different Crown. No one has been arrested for specifically not wearing a mask, you see. This is the point. Now, you see, the thing is when you say no masks, well, you don't have to wear one. Okay, there are some exceptions. This British Transport thing I saw the other day with this idiot, but that's just one idiot, yeah? British Transport Police are a mafia, end of. I know someone who was tortured by British Transport Police, and you can't go up against the City of London and win, unfortunately, even though he had a very good case, and that case is still ongoing. These are side issues, but I think they're important ones, because people are focusing not on the solution, the cause of what's happening, but on the effect that it's having. The effect that the cause is having is of no importance. It's the cause of the whole thing, which is the act, the COVID-19 Act, which is really where the solution is. But the vaccine issue is unfocused as well, and the issue of liability from the untested vaccine and unqualified vaccinators is another central issue for legal importance. This is very, very important. This has been missed, really, by the watering down of the agenda away from central points. That's really the main idea of this show, is that to focus on what is actually the important issue. Because in all of these protest movements, every time I've seen this, every time it's happened, is that there's a side issue. It's like what the press do. They attack you with an issue which is not relevant to what you're talking about. They tie you to something you're not tied to. By association, they use logical fallacies, ad hominems, false arguments. Again, this ties into the use of the 1984 Act instead of the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004, which is the act that should be used. So there's no direction, no strategy, no originality, meaning no result. I want to get on to something now, slightly controversial. The Protocols of Zion, or the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, are said to be a forgery and an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. What they are is, in fact, a strategic plan for global control and government through deception. In this document, it is stated that one genius could scupper the whole plan, which is my central point. Now, when we're talking about unpredictability, I'm not talking about dropping your trousers in public or something like that. Some people are so stupid, they actually thought that's what I meant. What I mean is that you form unusual alliances and you become unaffiliated and you start to use real strategy. And in order to do that, you have to understand the strategy of the other side. Otherwise, there's no point engaging. So this is what is meant by strategy, an understanding of how the system actually operates rather than an assumption of how it does operate. This assumption is enabling the new system to use the resistors as enablers. The true horror of the actions of the unthinking protesters will only dawn on them when it's too late. It is time for strategy and, yes, strategic intelligence. This will be difficult, as most do not read or understand the most basic concepts of how things actually work. Predictable rhetoric and generalised dissipation of energy is what's going on. Narcissistic airheads with nothing to articulate make the most noise. Self-proclaimed leaders are already hostage and performing like seals for the state. How can this be? They are against the lockdown. Well, they're enabling the next phase of the operation. They are not planning ahead. They're part of the unfolding exercise. The state have had many practice runs dealing with these types of localised flare-ups and gatherings. In fact, they've been looking at this for the past 20 years. Because I was looking into it along with the sustainable development plans and the monitoring and closing down of areas before Google Earth was even on line. So all this stuff is already within the computerized systems, which is why it has to be something unpredictable that is a solution. The New World system is already using these things for the next phase without knowledge of what part they're playing. People are getting involved as part of an exercise. They'll never be able to think their way around anything if they are in the moment, in the actual exercise. Some of them will call it fascism. And what they are participating in is much bigger than fascism or communism. It is communitarianism, because by protesting, they are enabling what they are protesting against. This is something that a lot of people find impossible to understand. When looking at protest as an aid to global governance, it is worth looking at the fake protests and the enabling agitation groups funded by George Soros, including, of course, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, and Occupy. Now, those that follow these fake protests and protests that have been taken over, as in Occupy, are unsophisticated and need leaders. The leaders basically are just Saul Alinsky-styled change agents. And if you don't know who Saul Alinsky is, I've probably been confusing you a bit with what I'm talking about for the past hour. But a lot of people aren't even bright enough to have read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which is the basis of the big society. So, in conclusion for tonight's show, I've got a mission statement which we were using against local councils. And only a few people took it up, but they did have some success with using these principles. And this is what I want to explore more in the weeks to come, because the whole idea of this is we use our brains. It's great using strategy and thinking. It's something that I've grown to really like. The mission statement. We are an unaffiliated group concerned about the lack of democratic process. We will remain unaffiliated as individuals acting collectively and within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard. So you use the language of the globalists back at the globalists. We are not affiliated with any group or organisation whatsoever. This does not mean that we do or do not endorse other groups. Very important, this, because even that gatekeeper, Peter Hitchens, said, I went down to Trafalgar Square, all the anti-maskers, and then a fascist banner was draped over. Of course a fascist banner was draped over there. Who do you think put that there? Your employees. Yes, the Crown. The people who you're affiliated to, the people who you're protecting by pretending to go against them. So there you go. This does not mean that we do or do not endorse other groups. Very important. We do not agree with arriving at a consensus through being steered into predetermined outcomes by trained facilitators. And those trained facilitators could well be the leaders of your local protest group. We deem this to be against the public interest and an affront to democracy. Of course, I'm using their language. We know, of course, that there is no such thing as a democracy within this system. But we have to use the language that they use back at us. And that's called strategy, and it's called using propaganda. Now, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to be back on Tuesday and Thursday next week at 8 p.m. also with Kieran Boyle, hopefully on Wednesday, on Alternative News on his YouTube channel. I think he's back on now. And we're going to discuss this a bit more because what's happening in Ireland to me is very exciting because it's going beyond what the UK seems to be still going through. So that's it for this show. And if you're going to say, well, at least they're doing something, please don't comment on this video. Thanks a lot, everybody, and good night.